And welcome back, Bears fans. The next episode of Bears on Tap, more specifically, the Building the Board version of Bears on Tap here. I'm joined by Robert Schmitz and Steve Letizia here, and we are in Mobile, Alabama. We just got done with our third day of covering the Senior Bowl practices, final day of Senior Bowl practices. And so this is our final Senior Bowl episode. We're going to be bringing you guys, and just a quick rundown of how we're going to be doing this. So we are going to go position by position. We have our rosters here, fully all our notes on it, all filled out. And so we'll start with quarterback. And we're going to address the Bears' need at each position. So we'll go quarterback. What's the need there? How much draft capital does it make sense for the Bears to spend there? And then we'll talk about the prospects that we saw here this week. So open it up with quarterback. I'm going to kick it to Robert.
Sure. So obviously quarterback has been the discussion of discussions in Chicago right now. And we're pretty much going to avoid it altogether because at the end of the day, at the Senior Bowl, while we could tell you that Michael Penix and Bo Nix stand out among all the quarterbacks, while we could go through that if you didn't like Bo Nix, you probably like him less coming out of the Senior Bowl. And if you did like Bo Nix, you probably think he held up. I mean, Bo Nix is somebody I've heard the most split about based on who I talk to, just because everybody has a different opinion about the Oregon quarterback. But at the end of the day, the Bears are not going to pick one of these options. Almost assuredly, we're more than likely going to be either sticking with Justin Fields or they're going to be choosing Caleb Williams or something else is going to happen. And obviously, for those who are terminally online, like myself, you've heard about recent comments that potentially Caleb Williams may or may not want to play in Chicago. But honestly, I mean, it's media season. Right? We don't know anything. We're not going to know anything. And the Bears aren't going to have anything sorted one way or another until at the very least after the combine, where I'm sure Caleb and the Bears will have plenty of opportunities to talk and any concerns will get voiced. But we're just not going to know. So I kind of feel like all we can do is ignore it. Truly ignore it. Right?
It's all speculation on our end at this point. So.
It's one comment, but that's exactly the kind of the drop of dye in the water that's always going to spread, right? So wanted to make sure we mention it, even though at the end of the day, we don't know. We have no idea.
We're in the Super Bowl lull right now, the 2 weeks in between, and certain people in the media know what to say in this lull period to get people talking, and people know that the Bears aren't an easy target, and I'll just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Bears are a click-worthy target.
Yep.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
But so do you guys want to really talk about these guys? I mean, I know you touched on Bo Nix a little, like, you know, if you liked him, you probably liked him. If you didn't like him, you probably didn't like him. There's not, and to be honest to you guys, that there's not a whole lot that you really see in quarterbacks out here.
No.
I mean, they're working with receivers they have no chemistry with, and they're working behind an O-line who doesn't know their tendencies, their scrambling tendencies, where they move to. I mean, so in warm-ups, we saw Joe Milton flick his wrist for the ball to fly 50 yards, with the easiest thing I've ever seen in my life. But that's about the most feedback I have on
honestly,
quarterbacks.
halftime, even though I'm watching the wide receivers and DBs, I'm not even paying attention to who's throwing the ball.
Yeah.
Right. Because the Bears don't need a quarterback. Well, the Bears aren't going to be drafting any of these quarterbacks. So I'm focusing on 100% on the wide receiver DBs. I'll see the play and be like, oh, I wonder who threw that. By the time I look back, they're moving around. I can't even tell anyway.
100%. I mean, it's just a funky event, right? Especially because you got to remember that you're looking at something that's got no game planning whatsoever. In theory, this is a group of some of the best defenders that many of these quarterbacks have faced at once. So the windows are tighter than literally ever. And you have no chemistry with your receivers unless you're Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette, who did not play today for reasons that, to be honest, I still don't really quite understand. But that's a conversation for later.
Sure.
I feel like we can just lean on the fact that the Bears don't have a desperate need at quarterback and move on if you guys feel that way.
Sounds good to me. So we'll go ahead and just move right on to running back, which is a spot that, you know, I think there is some need there. It might not be pressing capital that you need to spend on it. You have Khalil Herbert, you have Roschon Johnson in-house. So you feel fine about it, but my personal opinion is you can use a little more giddy up in that room, a little more juice, a little more just burst. So what do you guys think?
Well, if you like giddy up, New Hampshire running back Dylan Laube is really fast. I mean, he's just a wonderful receiving back that is a joy to watch play football. How well does he block? How well does he run? I literally couldn't tell you because I've been so glued to DBs and wide receivers that I really only see him when they jump in to run routes against the linebackers. But nobody can cover him. So that's a good thing.
Mhm.
And I can't help but also name Marshawn Lloyd in this case. I think he, the running out of USC, has done himself quite a few favors throughout this week. But I don't know. None of the American runners really speak to me. What about you guys?
Well, just to Marshawn Lloyd real quick, because I've got my notes here, and I put a little dot next to someone's name when they do well. And I got 7 dots next to Marshawn Lloyd's name because he absolutely dominated today. Everyone else tops off at 3 dots. So, yeah, no, he was fantastic, especially as a receiver. And Q, kind of like you're saying, we need that extra juice. You know, I got Khalil Herbert, Roshan Johnson. Neither of those guys are a real threat in the pass game. I would love to get a pass catcher running back. Marshawn Lloyd would be perfect there. And, you know, depending on what they do at quarterback, might be a nice little safety net if they do decide to go with Caleb Williams. And to Robert, to your point still, now will be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're just talking about pure receiving ability, probably the best receiving running back in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
New Hampshire lined him up at running back, out wide, in the slot, out wide, everywhere. And he got open. Obviously, a lower level competition, but then he comes to the Senior Bowl and he's still getting open. And he was lining up not only out of the backfield, he was still going up against linebackers, but he was lining up on the line of scrimmage and beating them too. So yeah, both those guys were absolutely fantastic. 2 of the definite winners of today.
So there was a moment in one-on-ones where it was wide receiver or pass catcher. So we're talking running back. So pass catcher versus defender. I assume it was a linebacker up against him. But watching this play, and it's a good thing we're recording 3-4 hours after it, because when it happened, I was ready to pound the table for this guy. Just like, him. Give me him. Dylan Laube runs a corner route, like from midfield, like I guess maybe a post, but just ended up in the back corner of the end zone. Over the shoulder catch, gets his feet down, coming to the ground, gets the ball. Beautiful catch. I don't think there's many running backs who make that catch.
No.
It was just so well done. He played the defender perfectly. Dylan Laube really stood out to me today. And it wasn't just today. I had dots next to his name every day out here.
Yeah.
I noticed him over and over and over. He was returning punts out here. Another thing the Bears probably need some help with. I think that he's a really strong fit. I don't even know where he's projected to be drafted.
No.
Out of New Hampshire, I have to imagine it's in the later rounds.
Yeah, probably. It's got to be day 3. I mean, running backs get knocked down around by default.
Yeah.
So you got to think it's going to be day 3.
And then other guys that stood out to me, you already said Marshawn Lloyd. He stood out to me multiple times throughout the week. And Kamani Vidal out of Troy, I thought he made some nice catches throughout the week.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last guy who I really noticed was Ray Davis. It felt like, and maybe it's hard. So one of the things that's hard to tell out here with running backs is they're not actually getting tackled.
Right.
No.
So a broken tackle is probably a tackle out here, but he was consistently running to open parts of the field and just taking it 40, 50 yards pretty much every day out here,
Right.
Which, like I said, they're not actually tackling, but I like the conviction that I am going to the end zone.
Yeah.
So that stood out to me there, running back.
Running backs are such funny positions when you get to the Senior Bowl, just because like you're talking about. I mean, even the full pad stuff, it's just so funky, trying to figure out what they did or didn't go down. None of the linemen have played with each other. It's a very gamey position, right?
Yeah.
But either way, a lot of fun receiving talent in that group.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Ray Davis because I really like Ray Davis as a player. I did a write-up on him. If you haven't looked into Ray Davis' story, please do. It's an incredible story.
Over at ontapsportsnet.com.
My article, but also just other articles as well. Just do yourself a favor and read it because it's fantastic. I was sitting on my couch tearing up reading this guy's story. So, please do. And also, he's just a hell of a football player, too.
Yeah.
And to you guys' points, it's really hard to judge running backs in this position, at least running the football. That's why we were focusing more on seeing them as a pass catcher because that's something you can kind of get a better feel for here.
Yeah. So we can move along to wide receiver, and I think we can all agree there's a pretty solid need for 1, if not 2, rookie wide receivers, depending on how free agency goes here. And we're talking pretty significant draft capital for one of them. I mean, if you can get one of the guys at 9, you go there. If you can't get him there, you're talking trading back, maybe for one of the late first round guys, a few of the guys who we saw here this weekend or this week, and or into the second round. If you're picking up a second round pick from somewhere, there are plenty of options on this list from the second round on. So what do you guys think about the wide receiver position?
About the position or the position at the Senior Bowl?
All of the above.
Well, I think that the Bears are in a better spot than a lot of people would talk about, because there are plenty of rooms where you've got intriguing weapons all up and down the roster, but you don't have that difference maker. The Bears have the hardest guy to find. That's DJ Moore, right? They've also got plenty of draft capital to address this. You just said this, but it's so important to hammer and hammer and hammer again that the Bears aren't needing to take the best receiver they can get in the third round and have us hope and pray that that guy is good enough. They've got their pick of the litter. If anything, you could argue that the situation the Bears are in makes evaluating these Senior Bowl receivers kind of funky for us Chicago fans, because the Bears probably aren't going to take a receiver, up high and also in the middle. It'll be up high and at the end, or it'll just be up high, or it'll be just in the middle. So I guess maybe a Ricky Pearsall type could try to become that Bears number 2 option, or a Devontae Walker, even though I honestly thought he did not have a phenomenal day today. And I really don't know that the Bears would trust this position, especially if they do go rookie quarterback, with somebody like Roman Wilson, right? But there's a lot of really fun options that I can't wait to dig into with you guys, at least at the wide receiver position here at the Senior Bowl, even though some of our favorites didn't play today.
Yeah, and like you said, you were spot on. If you take Odunze at 9, let's just say Odunze, you're not necessarily going to draft a guy on day 2, maybe day 3. But if you go edge, let's say in the first round, then I kind of want to see your second and third round pick used on a wide receiver. Do the Packers approach, draft 3 wide receivers at that point, maybe 2 in the middle and 1 late. A lot of options, a lot of different guys though. If we're just talking about guys who stood out this week, I mean, I think you got to start with Ladd McConkey. There were plenty of guys who did, but he, to me, just was one of, if not the best wide receivers here.
Love that he played today. I mean, there's so many guys that sat out day 3 because they felt like their first 2 days were enough. Ladd McConkey had something to prove, and I think he had a really good day today too. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun watching him get to play ball.
Wide receiver from Georgia, if you're not familiar, a little undersized, but just gets open. He consistently, pretty much every rep, he was getting open. So
I mean, I feel like the first 2 days, especially, McConkey was kind of the talk of the Senior Bowl.
But it's also funny because it was almost like expected.
Yeah,
like everyone was like, "Yeah, then McConkey's getting open again. That's what he's supposed to be doing here." And like, if he didn't get open on one route, you'd be like, "Ooh, man, what's going on there?" So it's just kind of expected, and it's almost like it's even more impressive that he came out on day 3, because he had a lot to lose. If he had just an average day, people would be like, "What the hell's going on with Ladd McConkey?" Right. So yeah, it was just kind of expected of him to do that, and he lived up to the hype, honestly, if not more so.
And it's so funny too, because when you get the chance to watch these guys live and in an unusual environment, right? You get the chance to see how they respond to situations that maybe they'll be presented with in the NFL, at least early, and how are they going to react to all the adversity that comes with these kinds of moments, right? And wide receivers like Jamari Thrash really pop. I mean, Thrash was – it's funny you talk about a guy with such a violent last name, but Thrash was a competitor, top to bottom, all throughout this week. I thought Brendan Rice did himself –
and a punt returner.
I thought Brendan Rice did himself a lot of favors. He looked physical, he looked strong, and then today he separated with his feet a little bit. Don't go too crazy with him, but you compare him to somebody like Devontae Walker, where the 3 of us we ended up catching up with the scout in the area, which was a whole lot of fun. And he in particular was so frustrated with Devontae Walker. He said he was talking with Devontae's agent, and he was like, "Is he going to have a better day tomorrow?" in reference to day 3. And Devontae's agent was like, yeah, it's coming. And he still didn't really catch the ball well today. I mean, it's
I was going to say, we talked about him yesterday, and we were like, he was getting open. Yeah, he had a few drops, and I specifically said, I could live with a few drops if the guy's getting open consistently. And then today, he got open a few more times, but then there were more drops and more just issues at the catch point. The cornerbacks were just fighting through his hands consistently and knocking the ball away. And at a certain point, it's not, oh, you can deal with a few drops here and there.
Right.
At a certain point, it becomes a problem.
I mean, Q, you were talking about this morning where there are plenty of receivers that you evaluate where as you draw the whole circle around the receiver, you can get about 85% of the way through it and go, this guy's really good. This guy's really good. This guy's really good. You get to that last 15% and there's just something missing.
Yeah.
And you almost have to talk yourself into, well, actually, you know, if we pinch the circle a little closer, it's a smaller circle, but it's complete. Yeah. But there's Tez, at least over the last 3 weeks, felt to me like a major something missing receiver. And I want to throw Leggett in there too, because while Leggett looked athletic, I mean, dude had his quarterback throwing him the football. And you'd hope that would mean that he looks a step ahead of everybody else. And to be honest with you, just taking a look at the receivers on the American roster, I thought it was a real chance for him to explode and look like a dominant second-round talent. And I didn't think he separated.
Yeah, I mean, right after you said, Robert, when the practice ended, you said, you know, Zabel didn't even practice today, and I didn't even notice. Because, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize. Yeah, you're right. He wasn't practicing. And it just, because he didn't really make any noise the first couple of days, and obviously didn't practice today. So yeah, really the kind of missed opportunity for him to separate himself.
And to be clear, I think when we're saying, you know, a receiver with just a little bit something missing, we do mean a little bit. Like it doesn't. We're not saying this guy
like Ted,
can't be productive.
Like Walker sucks.
Yeah. We're just saying it's not the low first round pick that you'd hope to get at receiver or high second round pick. Maybe a little further down is where you can target them at that point.
Another guy, just real quick, that maybe didn't stand out as much as I think a lot of people hoped was Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky. I didn't really notice him that much over the last 3 days. You know, the first couple of days I was watching O-line, D-line mostly, but today I didn't really notice anything from him. So, Robert, I know you watched more wide receivers the last couple of days. I don't know if you...
It's so funny, right? Because Malachi Corley did not play like some... I'm trying to find a decent metaphor for this, right? Like Malachi didn't dominate. Right. But a lot of the guys that dominate here are either bigger than everybody else or they're faster than everybody else. And that's not Corley's game. I thought Corley needed to show that he had the feet to separate. And I thought he did. Okay. He just did so in ways that weren't so inspired as a lot of the other battles, especially since he really didn't take on a lot of the same corners that I think everybody was paying attention to. So he separated against Quinyon Mitchell. It's just easy to forget because honestly, he's not that big a guy. He wore 81. I mean, everybody's eyes were on Brendan Rice, who's I wonder if when you watch the All-22, you think a little differently. Yeah. But that's not to say he was an A+. Yeah. It's to say he was much closer to B+ than I think somebody might realize because he never won the day. Yeah. That's probably the best way to put it.
The other thing about him is his probably biggest strength is his run after catch ability. And you can't really...
You don't do that.
You don't do that. It's like running backs. There's no tackling, so you can't really show off your run after catch ability. And that's the biggest part of his game that's going to translate to the NFL. So, again, just not a good vehicle for him to kind of separate himself.
So... I hear the name Malachi Corley, and I haven't really watched him. I didn't pay much attention to the receivers out here. But I see Western Kentucky. My brain goes straight to players like Sky Moore and Wan'Dale Robinson. Is that kind of in the same realm of type of player, you think? Or because, I mean, I just feel like there's risk with those types of players that gets overlooked a lot at stuff like the Senior Bowl. It's happened historically.
And usually those guys, as I've seen them, are really quick-footed separators that look a lot more like Ladd McConkey, whereas Malachi Corley is much more like, okay, I hate the Debo thing. Right. But that's what people want him to be. Is Debo style.
I mean, he's 215 pounds at 5'10", so that does add up.
And what we needed to see here was that he was able to come out against some of these corners and get open. And I think he did that. But I don't think it was as inspired as maybe some people wanted it to be. But I also think it's easy to fall into the hype. I mean, what is it at the Senior Bowl? You kind of pick your winners early, and then you just ride them all through all 3 days. And you go, that guy's good. He's good again. He's good again. And Corley was, I'd say, like squarely fourth place throughout most of the Senior Bowl. And his small stature meant that a lot of people just took a lot of his reps off, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a hard time to focus on everything. I was much less I was much happier with McConkey not him. I was much happier with what we saw from Corley than what we started getting from Luke McCaffrey, who became an elixir matchup for a lot of the DBs here. I thought his day 1 was much better than his day 3, where he did have a sweet catch in 11 on 11s. Don't get me wrong, but beating zone, very different from beating man, especially when you're given all the time that Luke had to run all the way across the field. Doesn't need to be disappointing, but when you're 1 good day and 2 maybe less good days, and you were already looking like somebody who could be a fun back of the draft guy, I'm sure he'll end up drafted, but
Yeah, no, you definitely. You're not going to not draft a McCaffrey. He's going to go good. Another guy, wide receiver, though, I think we have to mention, because we've been talking about him the last couple of days, is the other Georgia receiver, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, who's really been impressive these last couple of days. He doesn't have his production. If you just look at his stat line at Georgia, you're going to be like, why was this guy even at the Senior Bowl? But he got invited to the Senior Bowl for a reason, and it's because he can get open. He's physical. He's got decent size, and he showed that this week. One route that stand out, just in particular, actually, it wasn't that great a route. It was on the other side of the field, but I looked back and I saw Joe Milton throw behind him by about 10 yards. And he just reaches back and grabs it one-handed and catches it in stride and keeps going. And I was like, holy shit, that was a nice catch. But that was just one example. He was getting open all week and making plays.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I didn't focus on receivers. He is the only receiver. I put a dot next to his name each day because I noticed him. And I wasn't watching, and I kept noticing him over and over.
He had some tough reps in the end zone one-on-one period, where it seemed as if there were a bunch of corners, whether that was Carlton Johnston, who ran around for him, or Jarvis Brownlee, who were able to keep up with him really easily. Rosemary-Jacksaint's biggest problem is that he's 6'1.5", so certainly got some size, but he's not so big that he can play the dominant X receiver role. Becomes kind of a tweener between X receiver, but also, are we really going to make him a Z, like an off-ball guy? And what do we do with him? Maybe he could become a power slot at the next level. It's like you're saying, he fights. He finds ways to contribute, but I worry that his skill set is built for a game that he may end up not big enough to play at the next level.
I think he's a complementary piece. Right. That's what he is. We talk about these guys that we like. A lot of them we like because they're going on day 3, and you're like, oh, that day 3 wide receiver could be a decent wide receiver 3 or 4. And if you can get a 3-4 wide receiver on day 3, that's a win. And I think that's kind of what the profile that he would fill. He's not going to be a guy who can win consistently one-on-ones and be that number 1 wide receiver, not even probably a number 2 wide receiver. But he'd be a nice add to most wide receiver rooms.
I agree.
Now, I think there are a few guys that I think we need to mention. And actually, so first, there's one thing that I wanted to bring up about Brendan Rice. And there was a story. I think one of you were with me when I was hearing it today, or maybe one of you told me it. But that after the first day, he had a rough time getting lined up in the right place and just a rougher day. And we heard today that on day 2, he was the first guy to volunteer for every rep. He wanted all the heat from any cornerback he could take on because he needed to prove himself to himself. He needed to go out there and fix the issues, which I think that's huge to me. That a guy is going out there and saying, that was a bad day and I can't hide from it. I can't shy away from it. I need to look it right in the face and figure it out.
Yeah. And it was an issue on day 1. He didn't need help getting lined up like 3 or 4 times, which is a lot. But it's nice that wasn't a continuous problem over the course of the 3 days. I think it happened once on day 2, and that was it. And then it didn't seem to be a problem. So it's a guy, and like you said, he was working. And it's not a great look because you want to be able to line up on day 1, but at least it didn't snowball into a bigger problem and he got it fixed.
Yes, he went and found answers to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, a few of the other guys that I kind of wanted to bring up here, one of them, Javon Baker. What did you guys see from him?
I saw a grab bag, right? Everybody's going to take a look at his tape on UCF, and by his tape, I mean highlights, because I can't find any UCF tape. And maybe you're in the same boat as me. But Baker seemed as if a lot of the good corners really didn't have much trouble with him. And one of the corners that wasn't as good, he made a sweet catch over the top of. I know, Steve, we're big fans of Baker coming into the weekend. He's absolutely got athletic ability, but he wasn't exactly Michael Wilson out there at the Senior Bowl, which is fine. Just means he might be a little more of a developmental piece than maybe we hoped he would be.
Yeah, I liked him coming in, and there isn't like all 22, and you had to watch just broadcast angle, which is not the best way to scout guys. But yeah, I liked him a lot coming in. I thought he had some good moments. He had some bad moments. There were some things that he realized. One rep today where he, it was just a goal line fade. Vertical was going to be through the roof. He had high point of the ball, came down, got both feet in bounds. Really good body control. But over the course of 3 days, I don't know if he made enough plays to really separate himself. And I keep saying that, but it's such a deep wide receiver class. You got to start separating yourself from the other guys. And I don't know if he did that, but he did show some flashes. And again, this might be another situation where he's going to be a complimentary piece. I think he has a little bit more higher ceiling than Marcus Rosemary-Jack Saint. Maybe he could be a number 2 down the road. But if you draft him, you're starting him as that wide receiver 3-4, and hoping he can turn into something more than that.
Right.
Now, another guy I noticed a lot of also was taking punt return reps. Jaquan Jackson out of Tulane. I mean, I thought he was just making plays each of the last 2 days, finding ways to be a difference maker out there. And if you guys have any comment on him or Nia Smith, I know Robert can always talk Nia Smith. So those were the other 2 guys I was thinking.
I don't think Anias practiced today.
No?
It seemed as if Anias had if Anias was happy with his day 2, which would surprise me a little bit, but
could have been an injury too.
Could have been an injury. Always possible, because I know, for instance, what was it, Jacob Cowing? He ended up getting Carter off the field, which obviously hope he's okay, right? Jaquan Jackson is so fun. The short king, if you will, of this 3-day Senior Bowl, and we'll see what happens with him, because he's going to have to test well, and anybody under 5'9" is it's harder to live like that in the NFL, but doesn't mean it's impossible. We are obviously not far removed from Tank Dell absolutely tearing it up in the NFL, so we'll see.
Yeah, and then for my own personal reasons, I got to mention one more person, and that is Ryan Flournoy out of Southeast Missouri. And I have to mention him because yesterday I believe he was the second fastest timed receiver on the field, and he made a disgusting sideline catch during team drills that I caught yesterday. I caught it on film, then I accidentally deleted it because I got fat thumbs and do dumb things sometimes. But I did watch it before I accidentally deleted it, and oh boy, it was nice. I mean, I bet you if you go on Twitter and look up Ryan Flournoy, it'll be on there, and it's one play, but I like it.
But it's fine.
I believe he's a Chicago kid as well. I
Is
could be
he?
wrong about that, but I think I saw that on Twitter somewhere.
Okay.
And we know the Bears love Chicago kids.
Oh, yeah, they do. So how about we talk a little bit about tight ends? And there could be some need at tight end, right? I mean, really, right now, it's just Cole Kmet on the roster, I believe.
Right.
So you're probably talking maybe a mid-round pick on a tight end. Outside chance that you could be looking at Brock Bowers, but he wasn't here, so we're not going to talk too much about him.
Right.
What did you guys think you saw out there at the tight end position?
Steve, what do you think?
Well, and then, do you want me to take your guy, or do you want to?
Do you want to go for it? Go for it.
Well, I'll just bring it up. We can kind of bounce off each other. Ben Sinnott, I think, was the best tight end here. I think we all agree with that. Kansas State tight end. If you watch the Kansas State tape, they move him around a lot. They play him as like an H-back. They play him in line. I think they might have put him in the slot a little bit. I can't really remember, but he kind of moves around a lot. Where's number 34? It looks terrible. He wore 81 in the Senior Bowl. Looks way better. He looks bigger too. Like I remember when I was watching him and I was like thinking, this guy's 6'3", 240. Like he's going to be a move tight end. He gets here, puts an 81. He's suddenly 6'5", 255. And I'm like, okay, that's an inline tight end.
Right.
And he's a really good blocker too, which is the good thing. In the team drills, it showed up. On the tape, it showed up. But yeah, I think he definitely was, to me, the winner from the tight ends.
It's so funny, right? Because a day like the Senior Bowl, you're going to see all kinds of talented players, and you're going to see different roles for all of them. Jaheim Bell might as well not be playing the same position as Ben Sinnott, and who I'm not sure on his pronunciation, by the way.
Yeah.
In the national team, I really thought it was Theo Johnson that stood out among all of them. There's not a ton to write home about there, so don't try too hard with it. And then it sure seemed as if Jared Wiley was content with his first 2 days because he went ahead and sat out day 3. So happy for him and hope he got what he wanted. But it sure feels to me like I want a tight end on the Bears roster. I would love to see the Bears take a tight end. I just don't know where they're going to get one. And I wonder if they're going to be drafting after most of these guys have already been taken, if only because I don't think that they need to be spending a second-round pick on what will probably cost to get Ben Sinnott. I don't think that they're going to want to spend a third-round pick on a tight end.
On a second tight end, because Cole Kmet's still going to be your starter.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Stranger things have happened. I mean, obviously, Shane Waldron famously uses tons of 13 personnel, but he also had a history of using Seahawks fourth-round picks to get those tight ends. So maybe that's where we're looking for the Bears to add an extra blocking receiving threat, but we're just going to have to see.
And Noah Fant is a free agent, and he coming from Seattle with Shane Waldron, like that would be a perfect add, assuming he's not too expensive, which maybe he will be for a second tight end now that I think about it. But you might want to do that with Colby Parkinson, another Seattle tight end. So I think that makes more sense to me than drafting a day 2, using a day pick on a tight end when you have so many other needs on the roster. So maybe you can get a guy day 3. From what I've read and from the little I've seen on the tight end class, I'm not really blown away by anyone on day 3. It's not like there's that sleeper I do like Theo Johnson. You brought him up. He's really all just raw potential at this point. So if you do draft him, you're not expecting anything this year. He was the fastest tight end. They have like the Zebra stats. So he was the fastest tight end out there this past couple of days. So that's good to see considering he's 6'6", 260. But yeah,
right.
That's just might be a guy you take a flyer on. But yeah, we'll see with tight end.
Yeah. So moving on to the area that gets me excited. Offensive line. Like, let's go. Let's talk about some hogs.
Yeah.
Like, so first things first, let's talk needs, right, for the Bears. Center, obviously. There's a need there. Very likely, I think, they're going to look to address that in free agency. But at the very least, or at the most, I guess I should say, we're looking to get a highly drafted center in here. Probably second round is what you're looking at. Maybe if they trade back late first round. But at the very least, you're looking for some depth that can play guard or center in a pinch for when, say, you go sign Lloyd Cushenberry. When Lloyd Cushenberry goes down, because offensive linemen just go down. That's what happens in the NFL. You don't get 5 guys for 17 games. You get 4 guys for 15 games, and then 3 of them for 16 of the games, and you're going to need to fill in those gaps. So at the very least, they need guard depth and they need center depth. They could theoretically fill that with 1 player, or they could go after 2 different players for that. It could go a lot of different ways. But as far as draft capital, I mean, it can go anywhere, like I said, late first to early second round pick, depending on how they acquire these picks, because that's obviously a big question with that, to 7th round. I mean, you could be looking for O-line depth anywhere in a draft. But Steve, what do you think about all of it and any players?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. Obviously, center's a huge need. Tackle depth, I think, is really important. I don't think they need to spend the 9th overall pick on one of these tackles because I think that's just a luxury at this point. But tackle depth is definitely important. You need a swing tackle, obviously, and then just depth in general. As you said, guys get hurt on the offensive line especially. So you're looking more, I mean, center, day 2, like you said, probably second round. Guard, tackle, probably day 3, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
But some guys that have started out, I mean, we've kind of talked about this ad nauseum, but Jackson Powers-Johnson, Christian Haynes were the 2 guys on the offensive line that I thought looked the best. Jackson Powers-Johnson, I'm not going to talk about him because everyone knows who he is at this point. Christian Haynes.
So I think we should say he's probably a first round pick.
He's probably a first round pick.
He's probably going in late first.
He also sat out today, I believe, right? Because He didn't need to prove anything else.
We said that yesterday. We
He's-
said it after day one.
Yeah.
He's probably not playing by day
Don't blame him for that. Christian Haynes did play. Christian Haynes, though, is a guy that could have easily sat out today,
Mhm.
and no one would have blamed him because he's been pretty dominant for the first 2 days. But he still came out, and I like that. I mean, I'm not holding it against Jackson Powers Johnson for sitting out, but I do like that Haynes decided to come back and still played really well, and he didn't get injured, thank God. So it seemed like a win. So I think, and he got center reps too. So that's maybe a sneaky option not a lot of people are talking about for the Bears at center. Everyone's talking, JPJ, Zach Frazier, Graham Barton, guys like that. But he might be a guy on day 2, probably second round at this point, that could, play center. I did talk to him, and he did mention that not only is he taking center snaps this week, but he actually cross-trained at left guard, center, and right guard the entire time he was at UConn. So he has experience snapping the ball and doing all that stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think he's getting out of the second round.
No.
Like, I mean, that type of versatility alone,
Yeah.
that's worth a ton.
And you got to remember too that this draft is really funny. I was talking with a scout around the Senior Bowl, and he pointed out that this year's top 100 is very, very good top 100, but it falls off really hard after around 110, 120 players. And so when we talk about a guy being day 2, or when we talk about the Bears options, even as high as up at 9, right? It can be easy to feel, because it normally does, like, okay, he'll probably be in the second round. I'm sure that there's 40, 50 players that are better than him. We don't know yet.
We don't know. Guys get overdrafted each year. Guys get underdrafted each year. Every year it's, oh my God, how did that guy last for that pick? Or, wow, they really reached for that every single year. So
But that instinct you're talking about, where you say, oh, he's a lineman, or like a good lineman, I don't think he's going to last that long. Maybe this year, more than ever, it sure feels like teams are going to prioritize a lot of the trench talent that's there, because there will be plenty of it as soon as those top flight receivers are off the board.
Yeah.
And that's depending on how the NFL values receiver.
Right? Yeah. Robert, I feel like I should throw it to you here, even though you didn't watch, I don't think, any offensive line specifically. Is there anyone you would like to bring up? If not, me and Steve can keep rolling.
Promise you and Steve are going to do a way better job than I am. Ask me again this time in 6 weeks, and I'm sure I'll have a few guys that I've at least looked at, but I've actually found it very refreshing to be like, hey, we'll get to the offensive line stuff later, because right now that sweet spot for taking an offensive lineman, the Bears do not have a pick.
Yeah.
And I know I've said it on this podcast, I have a very different direction I would like to go in the third round than offensive line. So they need to get that other pick, whether it's trading down from number 9 or trading somebody else to get a pick before I'm going to start really thinking about some of those options.
Yeah. So I'm going to just list off some names here and some thoughts on a few of these guys as well. And I think I'm going to start this off with Bo Limmer. Arkansas center, has played left guard and right guard in his time in college. So he fits that ultimate interior swing player that you want to see with the experience left side and right side. So his feet are trained for that. His hands are trained for that. He's done them both. And he impressed out here this week. He impressed me a lot. He's a bit smaller, like 305. I think he's listed out here, but he's 6'5". So he fits that kind of. If you look at the Shanahan type centers that you see around the league, you tend to find taller, lankier guys, and that's what Bo Limmer is at 6'5", 305. He's going to be a little slighter, but he's athletic, and man, this guy leverages his body. He gets in great positions, uses his hands very well. I mean, obviously, he didn't win every rep against T'Vondre Sweat. Yeah, but he won some.
Yeah, he got better as the week went on too, which I think is important. The first day he was just meh. He was average. Second day he was really good. I didn't watch him as much today, but you said he was even better today. Yeah. So I like that he got better as the course of the week went on. He got a little bit more comfortable. Maybe it's nerves day one, but he got a lot better. So yeah, he's definitely someone. If we're sticking on the center kind of train, I mentioned him yesterday, but the Kingsley
Egwicon.
God, I'll get that right one day. He's kind of along the similar lines as Limmer. Smaller guy, wins with athleticism. So if you are running an outside, not every team is going to have this guy even on their board, because I would not put him in a gap scheme. It's not his game. But if you want a zone scheme, you're going to be really highly coveting him because he can get out in space. He can reach blocks, get to the second level. Everything you want a center to do athletically, he's going to be a guy that those teams are going to covet. I think that's going to be the Bears based on what little I know about Shane Waldron's offense. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But I think that would be someone that the Bears would want to target. A lot of good centers but more good centers on day 3 than I think I thought when this offseason kind of started. Limmer being one, Kingsley. Tanner Bortolini didn't have a great week, but I still think he's in play as like a center that would fit the Bears on day 3. So yeah, a lot of good options there.
Yeah, one other guy in the same vein that I noticed was Andrew Rain out of Oklahoma, who also has some versatility there by position. And Oklahoma runs zone concepts primarily in their run game, so that he has experience inside zone, outside zone, wide zone. Their blocking scheme, he was explaining in an interview that I posted on Twitter, was a little different than what they were doing out here at the Senior Bowl for it. But the fact that he has a baseline to come back to so strongly on that after playing he's been at Oklahoma for 4 or 5 years.
It seems like he's been in the draft cycle for the past 3 years.
Yeah.
To start, and it's like, oh, he decided to go back.
Oh,
he decided to go back again. So yeah, he's been there for a while.
So this is a guy who has a really intimate understanding of zone blocking schemes at this point, even if there are minor differences in the techniques that they want used. And I think that's something that's really strong. Again, he's another guy who's probably a little undersized, but he's of that leaner type of nature where he can get out in space and he can move a little. His feet are light. He's light on his feet, and he's a gamer. Like when I was talking to him the other day, he had blood on his jersey. Like he was out there getting into it, and I like that. Yeah, yeah. And I'm not quite sure. Like, he's a day 3 pick. I'm not quite sure where yet, but he's that type of developmental depth that I think you could really build into something over the next year or 2.
Yeah, and I think we've kind of talked about this before, but we're thinking they're going to go with the center in free agency because you don't necessarily want to match up a rookie quarterback with a rookie center. But if you do sign a guy in free agency, I still think it's smart to draft one of these centers by 3, and all the guys we just mentioned, I think would be good options to kind of sit for a year, develop. The Cowboys did that with Tyler Biadasz. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Biadasz. Wisconsin center, sat for a year, and then turned into a really, maybe even sat for 2 years, and then turned into a really good center for them. I mean, he's a free agent, so maybe he's even the guy they bring in. But all 3 of those guys, or 4 of those guys, I think would be perfect for that kind of role.
Interestingly, Andrew Rain, another reporter was asking questions before I was, and he asked him, who are some guys you model your game after? And first name he said was Tyler Biadasz. Yeah. Very similar type of player, I think.
And all the guys we mentioned there also have guard versatility. So if you are going to draft a backup center, you want that guy to also be able to play guard, because if there are injuries, you need that versatility. You can't not many teams roster a true backup center. Yeah. So
now, keeping on the center spot, just a few more names that stood out. And there's tons of offensive line. Yeah. So we could go on for hours. So we'll try to keep some of these a little shorter. But Dominic Pooney was a guy who was taking snaps, offensive tackle out of Kansas. I didn't think he really improved his stock a ton out here, but he proved that he belonged and that he could play center without really missing a beat, which I do think is important. But I don't think he necessarily stood out all that strongly either.
Yeah. I think he's also, he took snaps at center. I don't think that's going to be his position.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be a guard, but maybe a guard who can play center in a pinch, play tackle in a pinch, which is very valuable.
Yeah. And then, let's see, I think that pretty much covers it for guys who can play center. Looking at guards, Isaiah Adams, I thought, helped his stock a fair amount out of Illinois. He played offensive tackle last year at Illinois, I believe. I thought he had a pretty up and down first day, but the last 2 days I feel like he's gotten better every rep. Yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah.
And I spoke with him. Again, you can find it on my Twitter after the practice today. And he just really interesting backstory with him. So during the COVID year, there was, football was all up in the air, and he was trying to figure out where he could go play. And he ended up at a Canadian university to go play. But the United States colleges, they don't really go recruiting at Canadian universities.
Right.
So he had to go send his film to every college in America, begging them to look at it just to get a chance at college football.
That's weird.
Like at FBS college football, and worked his ass off to get to Illinois, get to the Senior Bowl, and now hopefully get to the NFL. And I thought that type of work ethic is something that I really care about in an offensive lineman. Like you saw that with Sidey Sow out of Eastern Michigan last year. Very similar situation where he had to go beg scouts to look at his film out of Canada. Matt Bergeron had to do the same thing. So I think that there is something to be said for that type of determination behind some of these guys.
For sure. Yeah. And he was impressive. Definitely someone I need to go back and watch more of. Because, like you said, he played tackle this past year, but played guard before then, by all accounts. And again, I still need to watch his tape. By all accounts, he was more successful at guard. So I need to watch him kind of in both those positions to kind of get a good feel for him. But definitely someone I want to get more eyes on. If we're talking offensive tackles, there's actually a lot of guys who impressed. And if we're talking about offensive tackles in the Bears range, ignoring kind of the top guys, we've talked about this, but Roger Rosengarten made himself money each day because he looks really, really good. And I think he's
one of the more technically sound offensive tackles I can remember watching out of college.
And I believe he's a true junior. So he's got a lot of room to grow into his body, maybe add some weight. And I think he could be really good. I don't know where he's going to go anymore because he's had such a strong week. Obviously, you don't want to put too much stock into Senior Bowl one-on-ones. Yeah. You're not going to move him up multiple rounds, but I can definitely see a team falling in love with the athleticism and the size and taking him at the end of day 3, which might be before the Bears are willing to do that. But it's definitely a guy to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the first day we were here, I said Rosengarten, to me, seems like a guy who's going to have a nice long NFL career as a swing offensive tackle who kind of, plays for 4 different teams over that span and is just a bit of a mercenary by the end of it, but he's a solid swing tackle, and that's what you have.
Yep.
By the end of it, I think this guy might be able to start in the NFL. Like, maybe he needs to add some mass, but how technically sound his footwork and his hands are in the way that they're tied together and work in conjunction with each other is really impressive to see.
Yeah, I remember he's a guy I've actually watched a fair amount of. I really liked his feet.
Yeah.
He always hits his landmarks. Like every kick size is perfect, smooth, not maybe perfect, but smooth, controlled, really good technique there. So yeah, definitely got to keep an eye on. Another guy that I like to tackle who I had no idea who he was before today, even though he was at the practice yesterday, was Travis Glover from Georgia State. So he took over for, I believe, Jeremy Flax was his name, Kentucky offensive tackle who got injured. And he took over for him yesterday. And I remember thinking, wow, Jeremy Flax got really athletic. Like, he's moving really well today yesterday. Turns out they just used the same number. They both had a blue helmet. I didn't realize to make the change. But Travis Glover looked really good today. Huge guy, really athletic. I need to go watch him more because he came out of nowhere. Apparently, he looked really good at the Hula Bowl. That's what someone was saying.
Yeah.
And they called him up to here. And he looked like he belonged to me, despite coming from that small school.
Yeah, no, he came up to me and said, hey, that guy, Jeremy Flax? Yeah, I know Jeremy Flax. That's not Jeremy Flax.
That's a completely different guy.
He looked good, though. I mean, I had context with him. It was like, man, I feel bad for Jeremy Flax.
They wore the same number and both had blue helmets. There was no reason to think he was a different guy.
Another guy that I thought had a really nice day 3 that I really didn't notice I noticed him the first 2 days, but I felt like a lot of his reps were in kind of just parked in neutral. Like, I didn't feel really good about them. I didn't feel bad about them. There was like, he's doing the thing. He's out there doing it. That's good. But today I saw multiple really nice reps from this kid out of BYU, Kingsley Suamataia. He he just looked really strong and really hard to get around.
Yeah.
Like he was just keeping his hips in front of his feet and his hips in front of whoever he was going against. I was impressed by him today.
Yeah, I haven't really watched a lot of him, so I don't have a whole lot to add, but he's definitely on my list to get into.
Yeah. And then the kid out of Utah, Sateo Laumea. I butchered it, but I tried. Another guy who I thought did pretty well today. I thought he's gotten better each day, though. I'm impressed by the quickness of his feet. He seems pretty athletic out there and pretty capable of just being able to mirror, which is pretty important in the NFL. And he has enough mass that I think his anchor is probably pretty strong. It didn't seem like he had too much stiffness in his hips, where he should be able to just ease into that anchor pretty easily.
Yeah.
I think that there's something there with him.
Yeah. And then are we ready to have a little uncomfortable conversation about a guy who maybe didn't look too good over the last 3 days?
Yes.
Taliesin Fuaga, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, the Oregon State right tackle. He's being projected right now to be like a top 15 pick. Some people have him in their top 10, so potential top 10 pick. And if you're a top 10 pick, projected top 10 pick, and you come to the Senior Bowl and you're going up against not the top edges, Dallas Turner isn't here, Jared Verse isn't here, Latu's here, but Braylon Trice isn't here. All those guys aren't here. You're going up against day 2 guys. If you're a projected top 10 pick, I need you to do better than what Fuaga did. He didn't look bad, but I don't want to say it. I just needed him to dominate to get me on the top 10 hype, and that didn't happen. I understand why everyone likes him. I like him too. I like his tape a lot. He's big. He's really athletic. Explodes out of his stance. He pancakes everyone. Like, he's got good tape. But I didn't see top 10 tape when I watched him, and I didn't see top 10 performance at the Senior Bowl. I'd still feel comfortable, not the Bears, but if I'm another team, taking him in the first round, but more towards the end of the first round. I'm not using a top 10 pick on him based on what I see.
Yeah, I mean, really, I agree. Again, kind of going back to the analogy I just made, it felt like he was parked in neutral most of the week, where it was like he was fine.
Yeah,
he wasn't getting beat, but he wasn't clearly winning either. And I felt like watching his tape coming into this. I think I said a little bit of hip tightness previously, but I'm not sure I'd call it that, because he eases into his anchor just fine, and his anchor is strong. Like, he's not getting, it's not like he's getting pushed back. It's more about the lateral movement. Because you're right, he's explosive and athletic, but I'm not sure that he is his feet move laterally at the speed you need to for some edge rushers.
Yeah.
And that can put him in compromising positions.
When he's moving forward in the run game, his movement is incredible.
Yeah.
When he's asked him to move backwards in the pass game, in the pass sets, it's not as impressive.
It's choppy.
It's choppy. And this is an event that it favors pass blocking.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a pass blocker, you're going to look better in these events because the one-on-ones are pass blocking. He's more of a run blocker who can also pass block. So that's part of the conversation too. If you really love him, it's because you love his ability in the run game. And this is maybe not the event to showcase run game ability as much as just watching tape.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's well put. And I think Tyler Guyton, I mean, we don't have to talk much about him. He's not going to be an option for the Bears. First round offensive tackle, most likely. Best case, early second round offensive tackle. They're not really in the business for that right now. And then Von Foster, I thought, showed some stuff throughout the week. Kind of was easy to forget about on day 1, but day 2 he really started to show some stuff. That's an offensive tackle out of Mizzou, and I believe he's played some offensive guard. Is that right?
I don't know. I don't believe he has.
Oh, he has.
I could be wrong. But I think he's just been left tackle for Mizzou, and kind of in that same vein, because I view them similar players. I think this guy that I'm about to mention is projected to go to Ohio. Where Patrick Paul, I think, also had a pretty good week. Thing about Patrick Paul is he only played on the left side all week. And there were a few guys. Usually, this is an opportunity for tackles to play on both sides, especially not the top tackles, but the guys who are trying to, get drafted as high as possible. They'll play on both sides. Paul didn't. I believe Foster did. Rosengarten did. But Fuaga just played on the right. Guyton just played on the right. It's weird that some of these guys weren't, playing on both sides. But Paul Foster, I believe, did play on both sides. So,
Okay.
And Paul looked pretty good too.
Yeah. I thought Paul took his lumps here and there, but for the most part, you're right. I think his power is just a dominant trait, and he showed it enough to feel like there's something to work with there.
He reminds me a lot of Braxton Jones coming out.
Yeah.
Very, very similar players, but just long, athletic guys. So I don't know where he's going to get drafted. It'll be interesting, but I thought he at least looked okay.
And then lastly, I got to mention Christian Jones at offensive tackle. I think that he might have helped his draft stock almost as much as anyone this week. To your point, he only played right tackle throughout the week, but man, he stonewalled some people.
Yeah, that's another back to the tape guy because I didn't love it when I watched it. But if you built an offensive tackle in a lab, it would look a lot like Christian Jones.
Yeah.
So a lot of the hype that he does get is based on projecting him to what he will be, not what he is right now. And what he proved at the Senior Bowl that what he is right now is actually a pretty good tackle. So if he can be even better than that, you had a pretty good player on your hands.
Yeah. Now, before we jump into defense, let me check the comments, see if we got anything here.
We got a good amount.
This one from Football CF Candy. Hey guys, I know it's probably speculative at best, but the Colin Cowherd news today shocked me. I don't know if you guys know, but Cowherd is strongly associated with USC and the father of Caleb Williams.
So I have been silently working that angle for the last 20 minutes, and I can't.
Did we talk about offensive linemen for that long?
Yes, just offensive linemen. I want to point out you doubled the show length, and you didn't even get to the defensive line. Anyways, so look, here's the thing, right? I love Colin Cowherd. I might be the only person on earth that does. If you go look at the Bear With Us logo, it's Colin Cowherd. Like the man in the picture is Colin Cowherd, and I put a bear's face over it because I thought it was hilarious, and it worked, and I've used it since. But so the main thing that you got to remember about Colin is that he said this in October, right? Like maybe there is a piece of truth to this, but if there's something we know Colin does, and by we, I mean, maybe you do, but I definitely do because I listen to Colin more than probably everybody else. And he just holds on to an idea and repeats it in lieu of new information. And so maybe he had a conversation once back in October where Caleb's dad said mouthed off, or maybe he being Caleb's dad mouthed off to somebody who mouthed off to somebody who repeated it to Colin Cowherd. We don't know how the information circuit works, right? But Colin, listening to that clip again, sounds like, to me at least, he was just kind of talking, right? Like it was a 30-second thing. And the timing of it in terms of the Williams family releasing that now doesn't really make a lot of sense to like why this moment. I think if you're feeling like I am, and I'm looking into the camera because I really do believe this, I think we're all just a little on edge because if it feels like it would be awfully Bears for the Bears to have a shot at somebody that some people think could be a star quarterback, and for that star quarterback to reject Chicago and leave us in the lurch, right? I know that sets me off. I know even the idea makes my hair stand on end. So if yours did too, I completely get it, and I'm right there with you. But I think there's a better chance than not that this is just one of those like, hoo-hoo, remember when we freaked out about this kind of moments down the road than it is some big news. Because if it was big news, we probably wouldn't have gotten a full-scale article from Albert Breer saying the Bears are, if he was a betting man, that Justin Fields was getting traded at the Combine. The Bears, I think it's safe to say, are not going to trade Justin Fields if they're legitimately worried about the number 1 overall pick not playing for them unless they love Drake May. And frankly, if we come and find out that the Bears like Drake May more anyways, more power to them.
Yeah, I think that you put that very succinctly. And we have another comment. Compliment us on our nice brick fireplace.
Oh,
This
Here.
this is a better
You
setup
got a better sound.
than the Fortnite thing.
we listen to the comments.
It takes some time to figure it out, folks. It really does. We got here at like 1 a.m. on Tuesday morning, and then we get up the next morning. We go to practice. We come back. We got to do a podcast. We got to figure this out. Just throw it together. Go get it done. Like, it did look great, but we got by.
Yeah.
Tried to fix it yesterday. Somehow make it even worse.
Yep.
But we're getting better.
Something's overstocked.
Reps.
Exactly. They get better as the week goes. We get better as the week goes. All right, let's kick into D-line, and we will kick this one into gear for you, Robert. So we don't. So we're not, eating up hours of time talking about the trenches.
Yeah.
But so the Bears do have some needs here, mainly at edge. I mean, I'd love to see the Bears add a 3-tech somewhere. I keep coming back to, I can't really justify it until day 3. Even in mocks that I do, I want to add in D tackles on day 2, and it's just like the capital's not there. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense.
Even though I feel like the day 2 there is like the sweet spot for some of these D tackles, like Byron Murphy might be there.
I'm blanking on the guy I was just thinking of.
Chris Jenkins, who you love and we both love. So there are going to be good D tackles, though, but I don't know if I could justify using that pick there when you might need a receiver, you might need an edge. Like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, some D tackles who would fit, I wrote down here, Dwayne Carter out of Duke. I thought he finally showed something today. First 2 days, he was kind of invisible out there. But today, his chaotic style of play kind of came through a little more.
Yeah.
And you could see it a little more. Maybe that's a comfort thing. He'd be a guy I'm interested to see how he actually plays in the game because he finally put some pieces together in the last practice here, and I wonder if he can carry that over.
Yeah.
And then Tyler Davis had some moments. Again, today was probably his best day of practice. He like us, was okay day 1, struggled on day 2, and was pretty good on day 3.
Yeah.
And then Gabe Hall, I need to go rewatch him.
Yeah, I watched Gabe Hall last year because I thought, for some reason, he declared, and I thought he looked really good. He's more of like a 5 technique. I don't know about the fit with the Bears because he's like 6'6", 285, something like that. So he kind of just screams 5 technique. But I watched him a little bit this year, and I wasn't as impressed as I was last year. But he definitely made some plays in the Super Bowl. So maybe need to take another look.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing with him was one-on-ones. He was winning all week. But it didn't feel like he was making a big impact in team drills, which could have just been he's getting lost in the shuffle. It's hard to always see what's happening on the interior there.
Yeah, it might kind of points to maybe there's like a processing issue with him because when he just has to see a guy in front of him and he knows he needs to beat him, he doesn't really have to process anything. Maybe he's overthinking a little bit when it gets in the team drill, looking to the backfield a little bit too long on play action, stuff like that. Who knows what it is, but that's kind of what I'm thinking with him. I think the mental side of it, and this is a lot of speculation on my part, mental side of it might be where he might struggle.
And what about Darius Robinson?
Darius Robinson was the best defensive lineman, maybe best bench player at the Senior Bowl these couple of days. Another guy who could have easily not shown up today or just, took a day off because he dominated the first 2 days. But he decided to come back. He decided to practice. And he, from what I thought, and I wasn't watching the D-line as closely as I was the last couple of days, he was still pretty good. And I think that speaks to his competitiveness. Everything. When I did my write-up on him, I did some research. Everything I read about him from his coaches was like, this guy's just a competitor. And I think that this kind of just adds on to that. He wasn't ready to just hang it up. He wants to compete. And I think he put himself in that first-round conversation.
Yeah, and that's loud conversation because I mean you go over to pff.com and you do their mock draft, you can get them in the 4th round,
and that's not just us speculating wildly, that's coming from national guys too. I'm starting to say that a little bit too. So
so he might not really even be an option for the Bears at that point, but
and I'm not even sure
he was fun to mock while it lasted,
but man, he's a fun player to watch.
And then any other guys on the interior, I think Braden Fiske could be an interesting guy to kind of target as a 3-tech. Guy is just pure chaos for better or worse, chaos.
Yeah.
And then the other guy that I noticed a few times today on the interior was Eric Watts, but I think you can speak a little more to Eric Watts than I can.
Yeah, I haven't watched a ton of Eric Watts, but I like what I've seen from the one game of all 22 I had of him. But he's more of a power rusher, kind of fits the Eberflus style. We've kind of talked about this, these last couple of days, but we feel that the Bears need a kind of a different style edge to put opposite Montez Sweat. And I'm not comparing Eric Watts to Montez Sweat, but from a how they win is similar with physicality and power, rather than finding what I think they need is an edge that wins more with speed and bend and stuff like that. But I do think he's a good player and would be, an option on day 3 for sure.
Yeah. And then at the edge, or was there anyone else in the interior you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I just want to bring up Brandon Doyles because I like him. I'm not going to, I've mentioned it before, but I think he would be someone who could potentially fit there.
Yeah. And then on the edge, I'm looking at, there are a handful of guys here who really weren't the most heralded, but I think kind of fit what Flus wants on the edge and what would really complement Montez Sweat fairly well. And as we said before, there is a need for the Bears there. They might be spending significant capital at this spot. Whether that be day 1, day 2 type draft capital. And honestly, there weren't a whole lot of guys here that are that caliber player aside from Latu and Braswell, who what did you think of their play?
Well, Latu looked great on day 2. I believe he didn't practice today. Am I correct? Yeah, he looked great on day 2. He took today off, which he to even be here in the first place when you're projected the first round pick is impressive. Braswell, though, didn't really do much in 3 days, and I liked his tape a lot. We both did. We all did. But he didn't really do much in the last 3 days, and he was getting some round 1 hype, at least at late round 1 hype. I don't see that anymore. He was a little disappointed.
I'm so confused.
His tape is so good. I don't understand.
I'm so confused by Chris Braswell right now because I watched his tape, and I think when I watched it, he was still being considered a second rounder.
Yeah,
and I had a first round grade on him.
Yeah,
I was like, man, I'm quite a bit higher than others on this guy. This guy can play. He's just a very sound football player. Yeah. And I find out he was on Feldman's freak list, so he's got the athleticism. But it just nothing worked for him this week.
Something was up because when you watch him, he wins with power, he wins with speed, he stacks moves together, he has the athleticism. He does it all on tape, and then just nothing this week. Maybe he won a rep or two, But just from a consistency standpoint, it wasn't there, and that was just very odd to see.
Yeah, it's weird to see a guy just completely not be what you saw on tape.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it felt with Chris Braswell, and there might be a good reason for it. Yeah. Maybe he is the guy that we saw on tape, but it makes us need to go back and watch more and find more answers on him.
I think I'm definitely going to do that. I think I'm going to be a trust the tape guy on him because his tape is just too good to let 3 days in the Senior Bowl really affect his stock.
Yeah. Now, a few guys, I'm just going to rapid fire these guys because I don't have a whole lot to say about them other than most of them, they're explosive and bendy.
Yeah.
And they're from a lot of them from smaller schools. So, there was Javon Solomon out of Troy. Austin Booker out of Kansas, I thought had some nice reps out there. Marshawn Nealand out of Western Michigan is a guy I am very interested in finding out more about.
Yeah, tough to get Western Michigan tape, but I hope it becomes available soon because he's a bigger guy that I know Flus will like, but he's also got some juice. He was one of the fastest defensive linemen on day 1 according to all the stats. He also showed more bend than I thought he would have given his size. Because what is he listed at? He's listed at
he's big.
268.
Yeah, he's big.
270 pounds, 34-inch arms. Even Flus, they love him. They're not drafting a guy who's sub 33-inch arms. So they're going to love that. And he showed more bend. So I need to get some Western Michigan tape. So anyone listening to this, if you have Western Michigan, all 22, hit me.
Absolutely. And then on the other team here, Nelson Caesar kept making plays throughout the week.
I liked him.
Out of Houston, and then Jalix Hunt out of Houston Christian. Maybe it's just because his helmet is so vibrant blue I just keep
Yeah.
noticing him. But I kept noticing him. I kept noticing some bend and some speed around the corner. I think those a handful of those guys are day 3 guys that you can look at and say, we can work with this.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, and then on to linebacker now. Matt Eberflus is the head coach of the Chicago Bears.
Yes. Yes. But really? Like, they have 4. They have 4. They have 4 linebackers that this regime picked. If there was any, this is not me trying to dunk on anybody at the Senior Bowl, and I get it, but I assume that our live stream is going to be made up of mostly Bears fans. And if there's any position to skip, it is probably linebacker, because they have $24 million a year invested into the position. They have a 3rd guy that they like, and they have a 4th guy that they drafted. So where's the room, Q? No, I'm completely serious.
He loves his linebackers, man.
Just for the sake, Matty was like, I'll name 2 guys just really quickly, just so we can say we did linebacker. Does that
Roll
work?
with it.
One, Cedric Gray from UNC. I liked his tape last year. He went back. He came out. He looked good. And I watched running backs in 1-on-1s today, and he stood out there. And then another guy, Jackson Sermon from Cal, who I didn't really know anything about. But in team drills, he had a really good interception and another pass breakup. So there's 2 linebackers to maybe keep an eye on.
Boom. And that's talking linebackers.
Now we can go on to the next position on our list, which is kind of linebacker. Depends on honestly how it's played. Safety is such a funny position, man. And I mean, what gets so funny to me talking about safety is, so the first Senior Bowl I went to, this is my 3rd one. It's always a joy. If you're a young journalist, you got to find a way to come out here. Truly, it's a great experience. But so 2 years ago, I came into the Senior Bowl really knowing nothing. Like, I wasn't grinding draft tape yet. I just had one guy that I was watching. Well, technically 2, right? Jalen Petrie and JT Woods, because they're from my alma mater, Baylor University, which was a really fun team. And they put both safeties into the Senior Bowl. And Q, they were terrible. Like, at the Senior Bowl, both guys did nearly nothing. And it's made it so funny, therefore, Steve, to watch this crop of safeties, because a lot of the ones that I've seen succeed, you go back, you think about their tape, and you go, I can see why you're succeeding. But then you've got guys like Bo Brady, you've got guys like Jalen Simpson, where they'll make the occasional play. But look, if you're not using priors and you're not being selective, that's pretty tough as far as the week goes. This just isn't real football. And of all the positions to truly judge one-on-one, this is the worst way to do it, right?
Yeah.
It's an instincts position. So sometimes it's hard. 1-on-ones is not an instinctual thing. And so to your point, it's difficult.
It's a game planning position too.
Yeah.
Right? Because when Bo Brady, to use an example for Maryland, like, you should go check out Maryland versus Ohio State. It's Q that said this a little while ago, but man, those Maryland Terrapins, like, they find a way to sneak some of the best athletes in the country onto that football team year after year after year. I don't know what they're doing, but it's working. You get the Jalen Duncan types, you get Talia Tagovailoa, you get, in this case, Bo Brady, one of the most exciting safeties that we really haven't talked about often.
Your very own DJ Moore.
Well, yeah, DJ Moore and Deontay Banks last year. But so overall, I mean, do you guys have any big hot takes? Because I can tell you that Javon Bullard had a really nice day. I can tell you Cam Kinchins had a very, very okay day. I think Keaton Oladipo out of Oregon State played well in his practice, as did Evan Williams out of Oregon. But, man, I could surmise this to say, like, I'm going to do a bunch of work for building the board over the next little while, pumping out safety scouting reports. And the game tape that we get from there is going to tell a lot more stories about a lot of safeties, that the more I watch them, the more my biggest takeaway is that I don't think draft media is talking about how good this safety class is, but it's pretty dadgum good. And I'm excited to see what happens from there. The Bears could very reasonably get a starting level safety in the 4th round and an impact safety in the 3rd, based on the way I think this falls out.
Yeah, I mean, you summed it up, and you watched a lot more safety than I do, so I'm not going to sit here and try and talk to you about safeties, but I'm just talking about the needs. Just talking about the Bears' needs and kind of where they're at. You know, we probably have seen the last of Eddie Jackson, where he just realistically – great Bear, great career, but it's probably time to move on. So you need a guy to replace him. Jaquan Brisker improved last year.
but hasn't been a world beater by any means. So you're definitely going to need a draft a safety. Maybe I think day 2. I mean, if they drafted a safety in the second round, I would have no problem with it because there's a need there. I think there's going to be good players available there.
I think I would actually be kind of disappointed.
Okay.
That's not to say that they can't do it. If they draft a safety in the second round, I'm not going to be unexcited. It's more to say that I think the value for safety is kind of like linebacker. Look, safety is kind of like running back is another way to put that. Cam Kinchins is it looks like one of the best safeties of the bunch, but the drop off between Cam Kinchins and Bo Brady or Jalen Simpson, who's slightly less athletic, but even more instinctive, I think, than a guy like Kinchins is just not that far, if that makes sense. And so you almost gain that draft edge taking a trench player earlier. Like you guys are talking about offensive and defensive line. It's a lot harder to steal a defensive line at 75 than or an offensive line. Like if, by the grace of God, Jackson Powers Johnson falls into the second round, you have to take him, even if you lose Cam Kinchins. If you're still able to get Keaton Oladipo, or if you even have to wait until the 4th round and end up with an Evan Williams type, I think you're surviving. Sure. It's just a lot harder to. I mean, we've seen too many teams find their 6th round safety that plays a whole year. Like, I don't want to pretend that the position is easy. It's more that there's so many different ways to play safety that I can tell you the Bears are competing with probably 9 teams max for the same group of guys, because the other 23 teams have completely different ideas about what they're looking for in the safety position.
Yeah, and like we said, it's an instincts position. But the NFL, year after year, falls in love with that safety who runs a 4.3. He goes to the second round. And then an actually safety who knows what he's doing is there at 75.
People go, Jamal Adams, he's really getting torched.
Yeah.
What happened? And it's like, well, you drafted a pass rusher.
Yeah, exactly.
You're playing deep. Like, I mean, the joke I know I keep making is that you look at Jaquan Brisker, and I think he's the perfect example here of like, okay, how does this guy fit into the modern NFL? Because as crazy as it sounds, I think Brisker and Landon Collins share a lot more similarities than you'd think. The game just modernized that much more, and the Landon Collins type stopping power hitter belongs that in a much more niche role. And it's a good way that they're deploying Brisker. But like you're saying, whether they cut Eddie Jackson or not, they need to start thinking about a succession plan. Sure. And that means, to me, drafting a safety with legitimate intent to start him instead of taking a flyer.
Yeah. Sure. What about corner?
Oh, let's get into corner.
Yeah, I got nothing to say on safety. I didn't watch safety all week. So I'm just trying to keep it going.
So it's so funny, right? Because we had Quinyon Mitchell not play, and he did not need to. Honestly, I don't know if anybody looked more dominant in Mobile, at least outside of the offensive and defensive lines. This guy was it. And the NFL Stock Exchange that we were just listening to talked about how, Tez Walker finally beat him on an out route. Man, if your big loss is a 10-yard out, like with the ball thrown on the sideline, you're doing fine. I mean, especially because this becomes a matter of what do you really think this position is, right? And maybe this is just my opinion. It is just my opinion. But I believe that corner is such a tough position in the NFL that if you can truly win 35% of your reps, you are an outstanding corner. Because you're going to take away enough downs and force enough uncomfortable situations, the quarterback will have to look in another direction, and you're already starting to affect the offensive game plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's more about having an impact than it is about stealing the show. Because, frankly, if you're stealing the show, you're just a Tyreek Hill away from not stealing it anymore. But so some guy, we've mentioned a lot of guys, and it'd be easy for me to keep beating Cam Hart's drum. He's so funny. Because a scouting friend of mine says or thinks that he has trouble reading a man's hips coming out of his break. But I see his length and physicality getting him back into plays even when he loses, that works out for him. Max Melton is also a completely unafraid player. And I'm not surprised because he probably does plenty of backyard practice reps with a bona fide NFL receiver in Bo Melton, his brother. And so we see him playing pretty well. I wanted a little more out of Kyrie Jackson. Jackson. I thought Chow Smith-Wade had the best day he's had, which is saying something because the first 2 days weren't great. And so he needed a day like this. But the stories that I really want to talk about is this Fresno State kid, Carlton Johnson,
I was going to bring him up.
and the Louisville corner, Jarvis Brownlee. Because both, I'm pretty sure, were late additions. I certainly didn't see him on the Senior Bowl's roster before, like even flying down, trying to make sure that I had everything set. But these two have really impressed, and more power to them. Carlton Johnson in particular, so fast.
Yeah.
Really liked, but so fast.
Yeah. So today was the first day I even watched wide receiver DBs, So I'm going to mention some guys, and it's possible that they looked absolutely horrendous the first 2 days, but they looked good today.
Right.
Carlton Johnson was one of them, like you said, really fast. One rep stands out in particular where he got beat initially, but recovered so smoothly. And that you're a cornerback, you're going to get beat in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recover? Do you get beat and give up a 75-yard touchdown play, or do you get beat and make a recovery and maybe you still give up a reception, but it's not a big play?
Right.
So I really like that for him. We've talked about DJ James. I think from Auburn, cornerback from Auburn. He's really good. Another guy that I had no idea who he was, and again, it's possible he looked terrible the first 2 days, was Elijah Jones from Boston College. I thought he had a really nice day. He did. I had 5 dots next to his name, so that means he made 5 plays either in one-on-ones or in team drills, which is pretty good. And again, didn't know anything about him. Thought he looked really good. He's got good size, like 6'2". I don't remember, like 184.
Like that. He's 6'1" and 6/10, and then 182.
Yeah.
And I mean, gosh, I hadn't seen this yet. Normally on day 3, you kind of turn your brain off.
Yeah.
But the one-on-one portion at the end of the American practice was one of the most adrenal practices that I've seen square off this whole period. I mean, it was awesome. And like you're saying, Elijah Jones was just pop, 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 pop. I feel like the magic to shining at the Senior Bowl is getting your attention and then having another day where you look really good.
Yeah.
And so Elijah felt to me like somebody who popped today. And so like you're talking about, he's in the get my attention phase,
right,
but he didn't have that day to really follow it up and get named, right? I thought Andrew Phillips did nothing wrong, right? Nehemiah Pritchett is a solid player, but I don't know. Maybe it's priors. I just haven't seen anything that really popped to me. But it's funny you mentioned, let me see, it was DJ Jones, because to me, DJ Jones has fit straight in that Malachi Corley tier where it's like, you have done nothing wrong here. You've had a perfectly fine Senior Bowl. You just haven't looked like a star. You've blown me away. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Outside of that one, did he have a pick in day 1?
I don't know about day 1. No,
I'm really reaching back, but I think he
might have. I think I remember talking about it.
Portions he picked a pass off.
I can barely remember the first practice this morning. So day 1, 2 years ago.
A lot of light corners. I mean, this is the time for that, right? If you're going to be 169 pounds like Carlton Johnson is, you're going to do it at the Senior Bowl, you're going to look really good. So we've got to figure out, obviously, you got to go back to tape, figure out how he fits the run. I mean, that's something that really matters to a lot of these NFL teams. And if you don't believe me, just go take a look at our building the board last year, where we had Christian Gonzalez as our number 2 prospect, and I think he earned it. Ends up drafted 17 because teams really don't like corners that aren't forces in the run game. And so guys that are lighter, it could be a tougher road there. But man, the speed he has, it's an awesome thing. It's an awesome thing.
So on corner, there were 3 guys I noticed today, and you mentioned all of them already in some degree. Kyrie Jackson, Carlton Johnson, and then Jarvis Brownlee. And that's all I have to say about that.
What'd you see with Kyrie Jackson?
It was a PBU in one-on-ones.
Yes.
It was nice.
I wanted him. So I looked at Kyrie Jackson and Cam Hart, and I saw them as very similar players. And my biggest problem with Kyrie Jackson is just that I thought Cam Hart outplayed him all week long. And I don't love that feeling, right? I mean, it's one thing when you have players that are similar but different. Andrew Phillips, for instance, outstandingly competitive. I know we talked about him almost a full hour ago, but when Jamari Thrash is running a route, that you can just feel something in his competitiveness. Whereas I felt like Kyrie Jackson, look, I don't know that he didn't check in, God forbid I say something that I really can't verify, but I just wish we saw a little more from the Oregon corner. But I say that out of love, right? I say that out of you've got better tape than I think you brought to Mobile. Same feeling with Xavier Leggett. Frankly, the same feeling with Anais Smith. But he's somebody that I would love to see test well at the Combine, which, by the way, man, getting off the back of Senior Bowl week, I'm amped up to see these guys run. Like, that's going to be so good. Colton Johnson runs a 4.35. Like, if he does that, he's going to turn heads.
Yeah. So I think that's all we got. You guys have any final thoughts? No? All right.
We have one more player that we scouted today.
I wrote him down in my notes on the phone.
So go ahead. Who am I talking about?
The Australian legend.
Torrey Taylor, baby.
Yeah.
Punter out of Iowa. We originally started kind of farting around in the American practice. We were like, hey, they're letting Torrey kick. Let's watch him. He's kicking from his 45-yard line, and suddenly we realize he's starting to drop every punt within the 5.
In the corner. Within 5 yards of the sideline.
Plunk.
In the 5.
Plunk. Plunk.
And the American team did special teams for about an hour and a half today of their 2-hour practice. So we got a lot of punts.
We did. We saw him drop balls onto the other, because then he started kicking to the end line. And I mean, I don't know if you guys saw this, but it was like he was playing with his spin. I mean, this is where I wish that we could, like, maybe I'll reach out to Pat O'Donnell, see if I can bring him on something and he can talk us through punting. Because I'm sure there's different ways to try to kill the ball, right? But at one point, he dropped one down that really did just stop on the 2-yard line. And I was like, you guys.
What is that worth? Like, how much is that worth to a team? Draft capital wise.
One of the scouts I talked to today actually said, it could be as high as a third. And he was like, I was, what? You're nuts.
I mean, it happens every year, but if the Bears took him in the third, no offense, I would be terrible.
I'd be pretty upset. But my thought is, if the Bears, so let's say the Bears lay out a draft board like a normal team, they end up with somewhere between 100 to 150 players that they have ranging interest in, and a bunch of them go. They lose 140 of them, like in that first 150 so on picks. The late 5th round, like especially if you get some compensatory selections, maybe as high as your 2nd, 4th rounder, if the Bears have just gone bang, 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 and knocked down needs, we can talk about it. But
I've gone on record saying there's no such thing as a wasted day 3 pick.
I love that.
It's a day 3 pick. If a punter has a better chance of making the roster than your normal late 4th round pick anyway.
And if the Bears are going rookie quarterback, look, I'm just saying, because I think this sounds crazy, but I do believe it, that if you've got a rookie quarterback, you're expecting that you're going to run into trouble now and again. And if you do have a punter, and he actually is good, that can flip the field for you with a defensive-minded team that makes you play bend, don't break, and forces you to earn every yard. Look, I get that Matty Eberflus probably just heard that start salivating, right? Well, but it actually makes
sense. A defensive coordinator whose defense is predicated on giving up 5 to 10 yard gains and then finding turnovers eventually,
right,
would really appreciate an extra 10 yards to work with.
Here's the thing, though. You draft Caleb Williams at 1, you draft Rome Odunze at 9, you have DJ Moore. How many times are we going to be punting next year?
Hopefully never.
Ever? Once, twice, maybe?
You'd love
in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Wouldn't we love to say that we wasted the pick? Yeah. But realistically, the games where I'm envisioning somebody like Troy Taylor making a lot of sense would be the next incarnation of one of those Minnesota games where the offense doesn't work for the better part of the half. And his ability to take you from the 25 to their 10 at some point, right? Because where I really feel like Miller Gill struggled this year, look, I get it. Everybody talks about the shanks, but like shanks happen, right? Mm-hmm. Every punter has the occasional shank. It's the fact that Miller didn't have any of the like mega bombs that you get from a lot of these NFL punters where they just rip a ball from the 25, which means you're standing at the 10, down to the other 10, and you go, oh my gosh. One of those like 70-yard net punts. You know what I mean?
I've never been so hyped up watching a punter. It was incredible. It was incredible. Like I was just sitting there watching this dude just boom him, boom one, boom one. And I was just like,
Yeah.
what did this guy do his whole life?
And
And then you found
The
out.
high school I went to, our punter was a running back, and he wanted to be a running back. And our kicker was a linebacker, and he wanted to be a linebacker.
even when they were doing punt return drills, and his only job was just to punt the ball to the punt returner, the punt returners didn't have to move. They stood in one spot, and the ball was right there. It's just the dive ball. What?
So I'm thinking, so I'm like, I gotta look up where this guy, like, what did he play in high school? Because he seems like a guy who just, he was a punter in high school, and he wanted to be a punter. And I look it up. The guy didn't even play high school football. He was in Australia. He played Australian football in Australia, but he did not punt. And I have no idea how he became a punter in Iowa from there.
Imagine spending your whole life in Australia and then moving to Iowa. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's a lot of corn.
It's a quiet, different life.
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean, you got to remember, what is it? It's like moving out of living in the world of Minecraft, and then like you move into a normal state where not everything's trying to kill you. But all Australian jokes aside, all right, look, I'm just gonna say this. All right, we just watched a division rival go to the NFC Championship, and in my opinion, partially lose the game because they didn't have a special teamer that they could lean on. As much as we look at these teamers and we say, punter, a good one like Johnny Hecker makes a big difference in the Rams Super Bowl run. We don't even know the game, right?
Right.
We don't know which game it was that Hecker flipped the script and ended up basically keeping a key 3 points off the board just by booming the ball. I mean, even going just as far as like you get pinned in your own end zone, you have to punt out of your own end zone. The punt's just okay. They get it at the 50 versus the punt's really strong. They get it at the 25. Massive difference in how the offense goes about approaching it and the mentality of the defense. Like I know we've now spent nearly 10 minutes talking about punters, so I get it. But it's one of those where it's like you have the roster spot. And I think us nerds want to optimize everything. That is actually a uniquely interesting position to look to optimize because you're going to use a roster spot on a punter either way. Yeah. You might as well make sure it's a good one if you get the chance to.
Well, and we talked about it a little today. You could tell me that our punter's bad. I don't really know. I don't pay that much attention to the punter because we're not good.
Right.
But you don't find out, or I don't find out that my punter's bad until it's too late.
Yes.
Think about 2018. Second to last offensive drive, Bears punt, shanked.
Mm-hmm.
Shanked in the playoff game.
Massive.
Gave the Eagles a short field.
Difference too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it might be something worth addressing.
It's interesting, if nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's actually not that interesting. We've been talking about
baloney. What do we got in the comments?
Bears take D end at 9 or Bowers.
D end or Bowers.
We've been talking about this literally all week. Do you have a take yet?
I think I'm gonna have probably a different take each day that I'm gonna ask that question up until the draft. I want to draft an offensive player because you have a rookie quarterback, most likely. I want to get him a weapon, but not taking that into account at all, I would rather have Dallas Turner or Jared Verse or Latu over Bowers. But I understand going with the offensive player if you have the rookie quarterback.
Trying to literally walk the line between somebody having an emotional reaction to the news we kind of at least rolled over in our heads today, right? And also making the Bears better. If you told Caleb Williams that you were going to take an offensive player at number 9, and Neighbors, Marvin Harrison, Roma Dunze are all drafted. And you told me that drafting Brock Bowers was simultaneously suboptimal, but it was going to settle out the locker room. Well worth it to me.
Yeah.
Optimal in that case might be a defensive end because I really believe in a guy like Dallas Turner. But if that's the sort of thing that's going to piss off your brand new quarterback, look, we could say, oh, his opinion doesn't matter. His opinion kind of matters. Just at least in the early goings of this thing, you're going to want all hands on deck. And if this makes the Bears better at offense, which it does. How much better at offense? I don't really know. Right. It's kind of like adding a super power slot. So that's handy, but can we really use it? Because I would argue there are going to be formations where chances are you're going to want to do. I just don't see a world where you're lining up Bowers and Kmet on the same side and considering it deadly. But you could do split side tight ends where you could basically like imagine Q where you've got one on each side and you're going to leave one to chip and be like a chip release valve. And you're going to have one run a route. But now it's not obvious which one it's going to be because both can run that seam. Like, you'd probably do Bowers. Yeah. But at the very least, this keeps you from allowing the defense to pick on a side if they've got an edge rusher that they're moving around. Right. Because you can basically just drop one, drop the other. You can even have your quarterback check to it to do whatever they wanted. I can see a world where you'd have to get creative. And if it wasn't Shane Waldron, I think I'd be a lot more apprehensive. But Shane actually does do a lot of this. Mm-hmm. So I'd at the very least be like, okay, Shane, what do you have in mind?
So what about, and I've gotten this one a lot, saying that Bowers can be your slot. Mm-hmm. And that's, it's true, but I'm still skeptical of it.
I am too.
Because you look at Bowers, he runs a 4.5, right? Incredible for a tight end. Incredible. And he has hands. He can win at the catch point. He can win at the stem. Like, there's a lot to really like. But is it better than an average NFL slot receiver?
So what if we said that Bowers would be taking on a lot of the routes that the Eagles have A.J. Brown do? Where the idea would be less like, wow, you're just going to blow past people because it's so fast. Like, not that kind of slot receiver, right? But instead, more post-up routes. Like, routes over the middle, like a big dig or something like that, where you're trusting Bowers to either catch it or knock it down because he's a lot bigger than Anais Smith or something like that. So same, but different, right? Where you get more Juju Smith-Schuster plus out of Brock Bowers than you're trying to get, I don't know, like who's a slot receiver that's like old school slot, like tiny.
Wes Welker.
Like a Wes Welker. Right, exactly. Yeah. That'd be what I would envision with it, but who knows?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's where I'm kind of on the side where I lean towards the defensive end or a trade down with a defensive end or another position. You know, maybe it's a trade down wide receiver. Maybe it's a trade down. I don't even know what else they'd target other than end or wide receiver in the first round. To be honest, like maybe you'd go center if you really didn't attack it in free agency. But
I got a question for you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so like the draft music plays at number 9 and Joe Alt gets drafted. What is your initial reaction?
The Bears draft Joe Alt.
Like the Bears drafted Caleb Williams, and then at number 9, they drafted Joe Alt. What's your immediate reaction?
Mine's not good. I know Alt is not my offensive tackle one. I have other guys ahead of them. So if they drafted Alt, presumably,
let's say they drafted him in line with your projection.
Okay, but I still
Olu goes, or is it Olu first?
Yeah, actually, Latham's my number 1.
Latham's your number 1 as a tackle or as a guard?
As a tackle.
Okay, so then let's say they draft Latham. It doesn't really.
Yeah, just your OP one.
They draft an offensive tackle.
They draft an offensive tackle.
I wouldn't love it because Baxter Jones is fine.
I agree with you from an optimistic from the optimistic perspective that also wants proper value. I agree with you, but do you feel like it's a waste, or do you feel like it's a different direction than you wanted to go?
It's a different direction than I want to go. If you get, I think all 3 of those offensive tackles have the potential to be a top 5-10 offensive tackle in football. So if that's what you get, great. But it wouldn't be the direction that I would go.
I got you.
Yeah.
You feel like, if I'm hearing you correctly, it just puts a lot more pressure on it to work.
Right.
Because if you draft Roma Dunze and he's actually kind of disappointing, well, at least he's actually kind of disappointing as your wide receiver too.
Right.
Right. Like at that point, maybe he's a 700-yard guy, a 600-yard guy, an objective upgrade over what they had, but not that guy.
Yeah, and in terms of just like the roster fit, like I like Baxter Jones. I think he's fine, but he's also not a guy that I ever see moving inside to guard. Right. If he had that versatility, I could definitely talk myself into it. But okay, then you move Jones inside to guard. Then you have 3-4 really, really young offensive linemen with a lot of potential. But Jones then just becomes your swing tackle, and he'd probably be one of the better swing tackles in football. But I just think it's not waste of resources.
It's wasteful. It's a little wasteful.
Use of resources when you have other needs.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, so my instant reaction would be selfishly. Twitter told me I was wrong week 16 when I said Braxton Jones might be on thin ice here if he doesn't pick it up. But ultimately, I feel like it's a little wasteful because I do think Braxton's fine. I really was concerned this year, like weeks from when he returned until week 16. I thought he was pretty rough. And I don't know, maybe that's neck injury. Maybe that's the rotating door along the offensive line, issues with Jenkins availability at times. But I was a little more nervous about his play this year than some other people were. Not enough where I don't feel like he's fine. I still feel like he's probably an average starter in the league and one of the best values in the league.
And he's still young. He's still developing. So like the guy we saw at the end of last year is not. Hopefully, you think not the finished product.
But
the other thing you mentioned, the neck injury, that's not something you want to mess around with. They obviously have noticed if they think his neck injury is maybe not severe enough to be a career ending right away, but something that maybe this is going to shorten his career by a few years. You might want to take one of those top offensive tackles.
So we got one more comment here, and then I think we got a jet because my laptop might die. But you get Harrison so he doesn't have to be perfect, throw every time. You get offensive line so he doesn't have to be running all the time. Work around your QB, no more gambling on QBs. Bears can't afford it. I assume this is saying keep Fields and get Harrison and get an offensive tackle.
Got it. So trade down from 1 to 3, get Harrison in the draft, the best offensive tackle at 9.
Yeah. I mean, I understand the proposition. I really do. All the value that you can get and that adding more talent has to make Justin Fields better. The logic is there. It's just, for me, it's the law of diminishing returns at some point. Like, I'm not sure you're going to get the returns that you desire with Justin Fields at quarterback with all that added as much as you will get returns from a Caleb Williams plus wide receiver plus offensive tackle.
David, I wish I was complaining about Justin Fields' inaccuracy, right? Like, I agree with you. I agree with you. If you got Marvin Harrison, that means you theoretically get a much bigger catch radius and more separation so that you can attack more throws. And frankly, he can rescue a couple of them. But that's going to help a guy a lot more like Brock Purdy than it is probably going to help a guy like Justin, who right now triggers the bigger issue. So maybe Marvin gets open more, but I got to tell you, as ridiculous as it may sound to you, Malik Neighbors is probably more your guy, just because Malik Neighbors is going to get so open it becomes criminal to not throw the ball, at least at times. Maybe Justin would trust Marvin Harrison and attack him with all the relentlessness that he hasn't attacked Darnell Mooney, certainly, but even DJ Moore at times. But it's hard to say. At this point, we're just going to have to hope that Brian Poles has a good handle on this. Q, we can wrap up.
Oh, yeah. Don't want it to die.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just want to
Just keep rolling.
One thing to that, if they do decide to keep with Fields, your offense should be an offense that is very run heavy, a lot of play action, boots, stuff like that. So in that scenario, you're drafting Marvin Harrison. You have Marvin Harrison and DJ Moore in an offense that wants to run the ball 30 times a game.
Right.
So to me, it makes more sense to draft an offensive lineman and then maybe like a Brock Bowers. To use that play action and use his ability.
Start the camera.
We still on?
Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, so basically that's kind of my thought process. You're going to have Marvin Harrison and DJ Moore in an offense that's going to be running the ball 30 times a game.
We'll see.
Yeah. And I think with that, we'll do it, folks. I think we're getting signs from God that we need to end this with the camera turning off and my computer almost dying. So thank you guys for listening. Make sure you go check out all our scouting reports over at OnTapSportsNet.com. OnTapSportsNet.com has you covered for Bears, Bulls, White Sox, Cubs, Blackhawks, Chicago Fire, college football, betting, all sorts of betting. It's called Bets on Tap or On Tap Bets, excuse me. And go check it out. We appreciate you guys listening and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.